So what do you see? It's a rock. It's a rock. But somebody that knows about rocks knew that there was more to this. And they cut into it. And they saw this. But their curiosity didn't stop there. They cut it again. And they saw this. A magnificence. Now, I don't know a lot about rocks, but I know about people. And I am convinced that this is a wonderful metaphor for each one of us. That inside each one of us, there is an inner magnificence. I think that was what was behind Abraham Maslow's personality theory about how to get that magnificence to self-actualize, to self-transcend. In working with people through the years, I realized there are three kinds of people. They're the people that Abraham Maslow was thinking about when he created his model of personality. These are the people that are self-actualized, self-transcendent. People like Gandhi, people like Abraham Lincoln, people like Mother Teresa, where they're living from that place, they're expressing that place, and it's noticeable, it's recognizable. So I'm curious, if Abraham Maslow were alive and were here today, if you are one of those people that you think he would look to and say, yep, I want to pick you, and I want to pick you to base my personality theory on, raise your hands. Okay, I just wanted to be sure I had the right audience here. The second group of people are those of us that want to believe this about ourselves. We want to believe that there's something magnificent in us, but we've been put down, we've been made fun of, we've been criticized, we've been told we're wrong, all kinds of negative experiences, and we've covered up our magnificence. And instead of the world seeing our magnificentness, they see our rockness. Then there's a third type of people, and these are the people that have been so beaten down and beaten up by life, they've endured so much trauma that this isn't even a possibility in their minds. And these are people that are living lives of quiet desperation. I'm not going to ask any of you to raise your hand, but if that applies to you, you know who I'm talking to. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about me, and from that, I hope that you will realize why I am so passionate about helping others, you, realize your magnificence. And by realize it, I mean two things. One is, I want you to know it's there, at least have the intellectual idea that somewhere in me is something magnificent. And the second part of that is to realize it, make it real, make it in the world. So the world sees it, and your magnificence makes a difference in the world. I've always been small. I started school a year early. Intellectually ready, physically a year behind. I was the kid that at recess, when the self-appointed captains were choosing up teams, they would argue over who had to take me on their team. When I was in Little League, well, that's really not fair. I wasn't good enough for Little League. I was in the minor leagues of the Little Leagues. And I was that kid they put out in right field, and everybody but me hoped the ball would never get to me. I loved school. Even in first grade, I was offended if the teacher didn't assign homework, because I knew that's the way you learn. You learn by doing homework. And so if the teacher didn't assign homework, I would go home and I would sit in front of my little chalkboard and I would make up homework for me to do. October of second grade, our family had just sat down for supper. Heard the town fire alarm go off. It was a really small community. We didn't have any professional firefighters, and the way it worked was As soon as somebody knew there was a fire, they sounded the siren, and whatever able-bodied men were in town would rally around and go get the one little fire truck that we had and go fight the fire. Well, what little 6-year-old boy doesn't like sirens and fire trucks? So as soon as I heard it, I jumped up from the table, I ran outside, and I looked down the street to see if I could see the fire truck. And in just a moment, I did. I watched it cross our street. And I knew the only place it could be going was the school. I ran back inside. I yelled at my parents, "The school's on fire!" Ran outside, crossed the street, through the neighbor's backyard, over the fence, onto the hillside. I got as close to the school fire as I felt safe getting. I could feel the heat. I could see the men from the town. I could see the fire truck. And it didn't take me long to realize the fire was way too big, and the resources of the town weren't going to be enough, and the fire was going to win. And as that was sinking into me, some of the big kids, now that's the 3rd and 4th graders, came up to me and they said, "Bary, why are you crying?" Well, I hadn't realized that I was crying, but there were these quiet tears that were coming down my cheeks. And I looked at them with great sincerity. And I said, "We're not going to have school tomorrow." Yeah, that's what they did too. Kind of laughed. And I made a decision that day. Don't tell people what you really feel, because if you do, they'll laugh at you. Skip to 5th grade. Middle school assembly, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, all gathered in the gym. I walked in, looked on the stage, and there were all of the instruments of the orchestra. Music appreciation. I was so excited. I loved music. I couldn't wait for this assembly. Over the course of the presentation, the man that was conducting the presentation asked a question. He said, "Do any of you know the difference between a fiddle and a violin? Do any of you know the difference?" Well, I did. I raised my hand. I don't think the guy expected anybody to do that, but when he saw my hand, he called on me. So very proudly, I stood up, and in my head, I'm thinking bass, fiddle, violin. And so this little 5th grader did an impromptu comparison and contrast speech on the difference between a bass fiddle and a violin. And very proudly, I sat down. And the guy that was running the assembly made fun of my answer. And the whole school assembly laughed at me. My answer wasn't wrong. It just wasn't what he was looking for. What he was looking for was, if we play country and Western music, we call it a fiddle. If we play classical music, we call it a violin. It's the same thing. It just depends on the kind of music what we call it. But I made a second decision that day. Don't tell anybody what you really think, because if you do, they'll laugh at you. And so I went through most of my life thinking there was something wrong with me, there was something defective in me, there was something deficient in me, there was something that wasn't normal in me. Here's how it works. We're born, and at our birth, we are magnificent. Parents, proud parents, look at that infant, and they see maybe the most special person in the whole world. And then as we go through life, things happen to us. People make fun of us, and we build a layer of protection. People laugh at us, and we build another layer of protection. People criticize us, and we put another layer of protection. And inside each one of these layers is fear, anxiety, insecurity. And this is what we show the world. And this is what we hide. The part of us that is the best of us. Because somehow, as little kids, we think that that's very tender And as little kids, it is. So, fast forward again. I'm in my late 60s. I'm scrolling through Facebook one day, and I see a Facebook ad for the Oh My Goddard Sprint and Olympic Triathlon. And something caught my attention about that. And I investigated a little bit, and I saw that a sprint triathlon, a quarter of a mile of open water swim, 12-mile bike ride, 5K trail run. I'm thinking, I know how to swim. I've got a bike. I've got a pair of sneakers. This is possible for me. In retrospect, I think this was my magnificence trying to get out. And that's what caught my attention. So I signed up for the triathlon, and I signed up for the clinics to prepare for the triathlon. I had my first ever full-fledged panic attack at the open water swim clinic. I had already noticed that I was by far the oldest person that was in the clinics. The irony was, if I had stopped to stand up, I could have stood up in the water. But I was so over my head, psychologically, emotionally, that I panicked. In the midst of my panic attack, the coach got in my face, and she said, "Bary, you know how to swim. You're a triathlete. Now do this." Wow, me, a triathlete. So far from this kid that nobody even wanted on their team. But it clicked. And so I did the triathlon. I didn't set any records, except that day I was the oldest person to finish. But I came home with a medal saying, I am a triathlete. I felt pretty good about me. So as I was kind of basking in that, I'd seen some Spartan events on television, just little clips. And my wife and I, once or twice a week, we were going to this little gym in Warwick that was a cardio kickboxing gym. And Heather, the owner of the gym, I knew had done some Spartan events. For those of you that aren't familiar with Spartan events, there are 3 categories based on various distances, and you run over very challenging terrain, and you encounter ridiculous obstacles along the way. So I went to Heather because I knew that she had done Spartans, and I had great respect for her and her ability as a trainer. And I said, Heather, you've known me a little bit. Do you think it would be possible that I could ever do a Spartan event? And she looked at me, and her face lit up, and she said, not only can you, you're going to, and here's the plan. In April, you're going to do the Beast. In August, you're going to do the Super, and you're going to celebrate your 70th birthday at Fenway Park, completing the Spartan trifecta. And everything in me cringed. And I wanted to say, no, you don't understand. I wasn't actually thinking about doing it. I was just thinking about, do you think it would be possible? She said, Bary, I'm going to train you, and you stick with me, and you're going to do this. The night before the Beast, I had my second panic attack. There were, 8 or 10 or 12 of us in the condo, and there were about 40 from our gym that were doing this Beast. I was twice the age of most of them. And I'm thinking, they are younger than I am by decades. They are stronger than I am. They are faster than I am. What was I thinking? Don't remember much about that night, but I remember the next day. I remember the Beast. It was between 16 and 17 miles of very challenging terrain. Over 5,000 feet of vertical climb. 35 ridiculous obstacles along the way. And when I jumped the fire at the finish line, I went off by myself, and I cried like a baby. There were tears of exhaustion, tears of joy, just overwhelmed with all kinds of feelings. What made the difference between this boy that didn't feel very good about himself and this man who felt incredibly proud about what he had accomplished that day? I knew it wasn't about what anybody else thought. I knew it wasn't about how I compared to anybody else. I knew it was about me being the best me. So what makes the difference is I was fortunate to have somebody that looked at me and they saw this. They saw inside to something that I didn't see. And Heather had a plan. And I did it not because I believed in me, but because I believed in Heather, and Heather believed in me. So, if there was anybody here that did raise your hand and said, yes, I am self-actualized, I am self-transcendent, I am a model for Maslow, kudos to you. And here's my invitation. Make it a point to see the magnificence in everybody that you meet. It will change their lives. And if you're more like me, I want you to realize your magnificence. And if you need to get somebody to help you do that, don't hesitate to ask. So what I'd like to have you do right now is I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to look at them, and I want you to look in their eyes, and I want you to see their magnificence. Just go ahead.
So nice to meet you.
Okay. Now I want you to turn to the person on the other side or behind you and see their magnificence. And what I want you to realize is that two people just looked at you and saw your magnificence. And I'm here to say, the extent to which we realize our magnificence is the extent to which we will be able to say, I feel good about being me. And that's a promise. Thank you.